Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the State of the Arc podcast. My name is Mike.
My name is Kaysen.
Sorry for the dip in production quality for this week. We are recording separately over webcams. I got really sick while I've been traveling for work for the last 2 weeks, basically. I had only really one day when I was here out of the last 2 weeks, and it was when we recorded the last podcast that went up on a Thursday. And then I didn't get back till like Saturday night, just when this goes live, the last Saturday night. So things have been really hectic for me. It will not be like this normally. This is a very unusual sort of schedule that I've had. So in any case, we're going to do the best we can with the setup that we've got. For this final episode, we've already gotten through the whole game story. We're basically just going to kind of go over some things that we alluded to in the early episodes. Kaysen had talked about the Mandala and Besaid Island, and kind of revisiting the opening scene again. So we're going to go over those things. But then we are going to go through some comments that we got. We got some really great comments on the last episode. Just kind of read through those and maybe work through some of the questions that we had and just interact with the audience a little bit. So that's our plan for this episode. So this will be the final episode of Final Fantasy X. We will move on to Metal Gear Solid after this. So look forward to that. Okay, I'm actually going to kind of, for the next while, just pass it over to you and just let you go at it. So take it away and let me know when you're done.
I'll let you know when I'm done. So this is good stuff. It's so funny. There's so much that we had noticed ahead of time, and the way that we structure the podcast, we're still making sure, we're still figuring out exactly how to treat spoilers, basically. And for the most part, we decided just don't do it. No spoilers, right? But because of that, there's a ton of early game stuff that we just had to wait until you find out that Yuna's going to die for the Besaid Mandala. In fact, when people ask me about what exactly is given away by that mandala, it is the fact that Yuna's going to die. Not only that, but many, many other things as well. But you wouldn't necessarily know that right away. And I'll get to that. But first, we're going to talk about the very, very beginning of this game. Mm-hmm. Because the first, 20, 25 minutes up until Sin kind of vacuums everything up, is very, it basically encapsulates the entire game kind of all in one, right? You have Auron's leadership. We can start at the very beginning. Here's a fascinating thing about the Blitzball players. They wear these goggles that look very Al-Bhed-like, I think you could say. And it's funny because at first I thought, because you see that woman as Tidus is scoring his goals and stuff, and Tidus like kicks that dude out of the water bubble into the stands, and everyone's cheering and stuff. And Tidus is not wearing goggles, right? But then as you see the other players, especially the players on the other team, they are wearing goggles, and they aren't just any goggles. I mean, they're straight up, they look like the Al-Bhed, get up. It looks like the Al-Bhed, uniform. But as I looked a little bit closer, there's some people wearing colors similar to Tidus colors that are also wearing goggles. So people on Tidus' team also have goggles. I guess it would just be kind of like a uniform type thing. But you can see kind of like a battle playing out within the game, right? And there's two sides. Right, and both sides kind of want the same thing. One side has Tidus, and he's doing his thing. The other side has a bunch of goggles people, but they both want the same thing, but they're fighting against each other, right? So that's the first thing to notice, right? Sin comes in and just ruins everything and kills everybody and destroys everything, in Zanarkand and starts sucking everything up. Well, you have Auron here, right? So all of a sudden, Auron shows up out of nowhere. He's the leader. He's going to kind of drag us all along up until we reach Sin, and he's going to convince us to go into Sin, right? And so the whole idea, you could almost see this game as taking place inside of Sin because of the beginning, right? And I'm not saying that's what happened. That's just, you can kind of view it that way, because as soon as Tidus enters into Sin, it's like all bets are off as to what happens after that, right? Everything could just be an illusion from within Sin. It doesn't even matter. But the point is that Tidus goes into Sin to save his father and to defeat Sin. But in order to do that, he has to enter into him. That's what happens at the end of this, of the intro sequence of this game. You also have the scene, the sequence of the building that, you know, kind of falls in towards them, and it's got Jecht's face on it. Mm-hmm. And, you know, as Tidus is running away from the Blitzball and following Orin and going, he's inadvertently, he doesn't even know it, the image of his father is coming towards him, right? In a way that he doesn't like, he doesn't want it, he doesn't expect it. And it's basically just a freak accident. And all of a sudden it's like, oh, my dad's like attacking me, you know? And so that scene just right there, that moment, tells you a lot about the game. I have a few other notes here. So we're also followed by ghostly apparitions early on in the game. You have Tidus. Yeah, he pilgrimages. You could call it a pilgrimage. You don't have to. It's just his job. He goes to all the different blitzball arenas to play his sport, right? That's what he does. So his job is kind of making pilgrimages to all the different locations that have blitzball teams. And they have to go into Sin to defeat him, and then the game is just a distraction. The game of blitzball is a distraction, the way that the religion of Spira is just a distraction from what's actually going on, right? So you get this different kind of competing elements, but that are very similar. And so the reason I want to talk about this part first is because it's not just at the beginning. It's not just that, oh, it's kind of cool that they kind of encapsulated the whole game in the very beginning, and then you kind of go through your whole journey throughout the rest of the game now trying to get into Sin to go save your father, right? And which is what you do at the very beginning, right? It's because of other things like the Besaid Mandala, right? And other things that happen throughout the whole game that you realize, and we've mentioned this so many times, Blitzball is the game. Like Final Fantasy X is Blitzball. Everything that you're doing is like a friendly competition. Even the summoners all are kind of competing against each other as if they're playing a game. You know, Blitzball is the thing that survives, and the whole religion and all of their salutes and their sociality, their socialization with each other is all based around Blitzball. And the whole world of Spirit kind of is like a big Blitzball game, you know? And then the church are kind of like the referees, and they set the rules, and you've got to kind of play within the rules. And anyways, that's kind of what it's like. And it's no coincidence that when you go out into the very end of the game, you know, you're on a Blitzball arena when you fight Sin. Or when you fight Jecht, I guess, as Sin. You're in the Blitzball arena from the beginning of the game. It's as if you're just playing Blitzball. And that's also true when you go in to fight Unaleska. And then you come out of that big arena, right? Now, am I right on this, Mike? Was that big arena a Blitzball arena?
You're in Zanarkand in the dome area, right?
When you come out and then Sin is there watching you?
I'm actually not positive, but I wouldn't be surprised if it was.
Okay. Now, I may be wrong on this.
I actually do remember looking this up, because I remembered when I was playing it, going in, and I was like, I wonder if this is the same building from the beginning of the game with the two statues outside.
The two statues.
And it's not the same building structure, so okay. I don't know. I would guess no, it's not a Blitzball arena where Unaleska is inside, but it is a dome structure that's very similar. It's a Zanarkand building. So
what were they doing there? If there's a domed arena,
yeah,
they weren't playing Blitzball.
It could be that it's a different Blitzball arena from the one we saw
for a different team
in the beginning.
Now, or it could just not be for Blitzball, which is fine because we end up when we fight Jecht, it's in a Blitzball arena. So it's, at the very least, that one's correct. But at other points along the game, here's a fun fact: there are 8 Aeons. There are 8 summons in the game, right?
Yes.
There are also 8 Blitzball teams.
Yes.
There's the 6 from Spira, and then the 2 that we play at the very beginning of the game. So if you want to total them all up, along with the Zanarkand Abes and everybody, it totals 8, right?
Oh, okay, yeah.
That's not an accident.
Sure.
Right? I don't think that's an accident. And that factors into the Besaid Mandala as well.
Okay.
One of the other things I wanted to talk about, aside from just the intro of the game and how well it was done, and especially, this is why that intro meant so much to me after playing 10. is because now I'm going back through it and I'm just seeing how exactly like the whole game this is, how well it encapsulates the whole game. And it's just such a good intro. But I want to talk a little bit about just the general religious concept of Gnosticism, right? Because that seems to be what's going on here. You've got Sin, who acts as kind of he's like a god, but not like a real god, like not one of the divine gods, kind of like a sort of accidentally man-made type god, something like that.
Right.
Not really. He's a force of nature, but he's not an actual immortal god.
Yeah.
He is a lesser form. He's an amalgamation. If you understand, within Gnosticism, you have all of the tiers of gods, and I think there's like 30 of them, and it goes all the way down to Sophia is kind of like the last of the gods, and Sophia has this like longing to venture outside of the pleroma of where the gods exist, which is more or less the far plane, and accidentally this
makes the demiurge of
the pleroma spills out and creates all the matter of the world, right? And Sophia is like aware of this, but she's not like, I don't think she cares that much. And this is the funny thing about Gnosticism. You can posit within Gnosticism a god that just kind of doesn't really care about you. And so through Sophia, the demiurge is created. And the demiurge, the great thing about the demiurge is that it thinks it's the god.
Yeah.
It thinks it's the top alpha of the whole world, right? Because all it knows is this material world that isn't even really a part of the divine realm. It's a separate thing. But the demiurge is like, sick. This is my place. I run this show now, right? And so the demiurge would be what Gnostics considered the God of the Old Testament, right? So the God who like is demanding the worship and who floods the earth and just kills people, and it seems to be a little bit overbearing. That's a pretty what would you call it? It's a pretty cynical reading of the Old Testament, but it's not one that's entirely unwarranted, right? And so the Gnostic Christians developed this idea that the earth was a place that needed to be escaped from. You have to get out of the earth, right? The earth is bad, and it's a dualistic frame, right? The earth, it will always be here, and the whole universe and all the material aspects of life need to be escaped outside of, right? And you can only do that if you're really, 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 really smart. And that's why the word gnosis means knowledge, right? It means like how much you know. And so
there's like a secret gnosis that you need to attain. Yeah.
And if I were to ask you in this game, did Yu Yevan attain some secret gnosis that led to, his ability to transcend mortality?
That's a good question.
At least for a while.
Yeah, like, because, I remember, I can't remember which episode it was. I was talking about whether Yu Yevan is evil or not, right? And a lot of the responses to what I was saying there in the comments were things like Yu Yevan, through whatever process in creating sin, right? And you kind of mentioned this too in the episode, sort of like became something other than human, and it was more like a protocol or like a program that just runs. And so that's why the kid was saying it's neither good nor evil, kind of a thing, right?
Yeah.
It inadvertently kind of created this cycle. I don't know if it was exactly what he wanted to do, rather than just like get vengeance on Bavel. But yeah. Anyway,
but Yu Yevan did want vengeance, but also did clearly want to preserve.
Yeah.
Xanarkand. Yeah. But at the same time, he kind of became something of a demiurge, right?
Yeah, right.
And was able to exact his justice, but also, show mercy occasionally. And he kind of became, the god. And, within Gnosticism, the idea that people can become gods is a theme in Gnosticism, right? And so Yu Yevan, being just a normal dude who just attained the gnosis to learn how to be a god and to live forever, and did it, and it's like, holy crap, that's what Gnosticism's talking about, Now, this game, of course, portrays it in a different way, and there's magic and all that stuff. Gnosticism isn't necessarily like that. But
You're saying
aeons. What?
Sorry, I just wanted to cut in real quick. Become gods through a process of theosis, right?
Yes, but because there's different types of theosis.
Yes.
Now, yes, the answer to that question is yes, but not the theosis that Catholic and Orthodox and some Christians think of, which is where you are aligned with God and you become one with God in that sense, and theosis to God, like you join the body of God.
Yes.
It's not that one. It's not that theosis. It's you become a separate God, separate from God and the gods in kind of a separate way.
Okay.
Right. And there are other religions that do teach that kind of theosis as well. So yes. But yeah, it's a very specific, it's a very individual kind of thing. It's not a collective idea.
Okay.
And so then, the aeons basically emanate from the pleroma, which is the far plane. It's basically the far plane. It's just this weird, gooey, like prima materia saturated like field out there in who knows where. And that's just like the place where all of the consciousness and all of the mental material and all of the patterns and everything emanates from this strange, place that is essentially the far plane with all those fireflies, right? Okay. So that's Gnosticism. I don't think that you know anything about Gnosticism from what I just said. I just cherry-picked a few things about that Final Fantasy X relates to Gnosticism. There's a lot more to it than that, and I'm sure people in the comments who are Gnostics will be able to chime in and tell you what Gnosticism is really about.
There's no unified sort of doctrine in Gnosticism either. So
Good point. There are several different schools, and
which is kind of the whole point of it. Like Gnostics were all about finding that secret gnosis within yourself, not about looking outward for it.
Which is why it's very individualistic.
Yeah.
It's very personal in that sense. Yeah.
Right.
But there are writings, and people did kind of look to like Valentinus.
Valentinus, yeah.
Yeah, to kind of tell them what the gnosis is, and he wrote some books, and a bunch of others did as well. But yeah, they're all different. So that's a good point. Okay. Then we have Yuna.
Oh, Yuna.
Yuna is a Christ figure, right? And this is great because I didn't want to bring this up early on because as soon as you say that someone's a Christ figure, it's like, oh, they're going to die. Like, okay, well, I didn't want to tell anyone that, right? But she is, but what's so funny is that at the very end, she isn't.
Yeah.
And they really subverted this within the story here. So you have Yuna. She walks on water, okay? Like, clearly this is a Christ reference, all right? So Yuna, she's on a pilgrimage to pray at all the temples and save the world through her death from sin, right? Yuna reforms Yevon and calls out the religious leaders for being corrupt. That's big.
Yeah.
Jesus did the same thing. Yuna is the healer of the group, right? So she has healing powers. She can let the blind see and the lame to walk and all of those things. She walks on water. She gives passage to the dead. So she's something of a psychopomp. If you've ever heard the word psychopomp,
I sure haven't.
It's what would you call it? The person who runs the ferry over the river Styx into Hades. That is the psychopomp. They're kind of a guide into and out of hell, basically. And they can help spirits kind of make their way into it or bring spirits out of it. They're also something of a protector as well. They fill a couple of roles. But a psychopomp is more or less what Yuna is because she helps the dead to kind of find their passage into the next world one way or the other, right? Then the eye color difference indicates mixed heritage. Of course, the idea that Jesus was the son of God, but also the son of human people. Her flower, this is the craziest part. Her flower has a cross on it. I don't think very many people would have noticed this, especially if you play the HD version. But it's not just like a plus sign. Like Titus has a cross that's like a plus sign all over his body, all freaking everywhere. But that's less indicative of the Christian cross. The Christian cross has an elongated bottom, right?
Yeah. Right.
Well, Yuna's got that flower on her belt, and if you play the HD version, you're not going to see what I'm talking about at all. But if you play the PS2 version, which is the one that I first did play, although I played it on an emulator with up-resed graphics, so it's basically the HD version. you'll see that there's 2 holes at the bottom. So there's like, it's a 6-petaled flower, and there's a flower pointing up, a flower pointing to the sides, and then 2 holes on the side, and then a flower pointing down, right? And those 2 holes are where she's got this like string kind of thing that goes through.
Oh, sure.
But anyways, it basically means that there's only 4 petals to this flower, and it's arranged in a crucifix with the center position being elevated, right? So anyways, she's got that kind of symbolism on her body. They changed it for the remaster. I don't know why. Maybe for this reason. Maybe that was unintentional. But either way, she's going through. She is Jesus. And then she decides at the very end, yeah, I'm not going to die. Never mind. And that's where it's like, whoa, and it kind of overturns the whole idea. You know, a lot of people will do this in the third act. You know, they'll tell a story that's very similar to a mythology or a story, a fairy tale, something that people are familiar with, and then kind of subvert it at the end, usually not to great effect, right? But sometimes it's like, oh, I didn't see that coming. That's cool. And that's certainly true here. You don't really see this coming. You're on your first playthrough. Where you kill Yunalesca. At least I didn't see that that's what we were going to do. But Yuna decides I'm not, and you know that she's not really going to die, but you don't see it going the way that it goes here. Yuna decides consciously that I am not going to die for Spira. I'm going to find a different way. And at that point, she ceases to be identified with Christ, right? At that point, she's a whole separate new thing, you know? And that's cool. I think that's fine within the story. What's ironic, though, is that then Titus basically picks up that mantle right where she left it off, and then he goes forward, and he becomes the sacrifice for Spira that Yuna refused to be. Not that I'm blaming Yuna for refusing it. I think she did the right thing. But someone had to die. And it was either going to be her or Titus, and she didn't know it. But when she chose not to die, is when Titus was consigned to certain death, right? So, well, death meaning, I don't know actually. What does death mean?
Well, actually, we will touch on that a little bit. At least what it means for Titus, with a comment that somebody made. So we'll kind of return to that one.
Okay, cool. All right, so there we go. We have all of this. I think the last thing that I have to say for all of you guys is the Besaid Mandala. So
yeah, there were a bunch of people asking you to go over this for the last
There's
episode.
A bunch of people who have been asking me to go over this through the entire podcast, and that's fine. I want to. I kind of wanted to make a separate video on that. I don't know that I am going to be able to pull that off. So we're going to do it here, and I'm going to do my best. Understand this mandala is very complicated, and I hope I can hit on everything. I may still do a separate video just on the symbolism of Final Fantasy X at some point in the future, where I go into this in a little bit more of a planned, kind of perfectly scripted, you know, video editing and all that. Yeah. But at the very least here, for all of you guys, people, everyone, I can show you exactly what this means. So, Mike, I'm going to share my screen right now.
Okay.
And here we are. Okay, so you got it?
Got it.
So this is the Besaid Mandala, more or less. I got this from NoClip, and the unfortunate thing about NoClip is that it is only the PS2 version. It's not the HD remaster. And when I first was exposed to this mandala, it was through the remaster, right? So I'm going to give you guys the idea here, but you're going to have to do maybe a little bit of your homework on your own through the HD one where you can see it a lot better. But I just didn't have the head-on angle that I was able to get here with NoClip. That I just wasn't able to get that with the HD version. So let's look at this mandala for a minute, because there's some fun stuff. I've been itching to get at this. So first of all, I'm going to give you a simple explanation of this, and then I'm going to give you the more complex version, right? So the simple version is that this is Blitzball. This is Blitzball, but remember, especially with what I said earlier, Blitzball is Spira. They're the same thing, right? Blitzball, the way that it's played, the rules, the environment, like just everything about it is Spira. And you know that too, because when Titus first enters Sin is a giant Blitzball court. I don't know what you call it. Bubble.
Sphere.
It's a Blitzball sphere. That's what Sin is. Titus goes into the water sphere of of sin to play the blitzball game of his life. And during this game, he is constantly referencing how similar this is to blitzball. Like, when you got the ball, you got to score. That's the one we were kind of talking about last time. Yep. But even all throughout, when he talks to Yuna, there's all sorts of times. There are many moments where Tidus is making a blitzball reference in relation to just spirit, to being a guardian, to summoning, or to whatever it is, right? So he's clearly making this connection, right? Now, I can't show it right now, right here. You guys, you're going to have to go back to Luca within the game, and you're going to look at all of the places where you can see all of these designs. You're going to see the circle with the parenthetics around it going all around the stadium in Luca. You're going to see these markers on all of the bleachers where the people sit. So this represents the bleachers. This represents the walls that are going all around the entire arena. This is fun stuff. This right here, this symbol, this is the Maester. This is when Micah shows up. He sits on a throne that looks exactly like this, and it is placed correctly within the stadium as well. So he's sitting on this throne. It's jutting out, kind of out of the, the arena into this part where all the people are sitting, right? Then you have this gap, this wonderful little gap here. This is just showing the stone texture that's behind everything, right? So there's a separation between what's happening in these circles and then what's happening in these inner circles right here. So the separation is that this right here, this symbol, I have been calling it the symbol of the Fireflies throughout this entire game. And the reason I reference it here, you see it here as well as something like it in here. Now, I do have to mention that this part right here, and you can see my cursor, right, Mike?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, this part here looks very different in the HD remaster. These thick parts that are right here, it looks like there's a bunch of string parts going out from it, and then there's a bunch of thick, like, ovals here. Those thick ovals are a lot thinner in the HD remaster, so it was a lot clearer that this was meant to be representative of water. Now, Fireflies being important here because Fireflies are electricity, and this is something we'd also touched on in the podcast. The whole game of blitzball is generated through an electric shock to the water that basically, forces it into this form, and then the electricity, which is the energy of the Fireflies, is what keeps the blitzball arena, the blitzball sphere, in that shape, right? And so you have the energy of the Fireflies, but then just kind of the general water that's also going all around it. Now, one really important thing when you're reading symbols is to understand kind of the most common symbols that you'll see, the most common patterns that you'll see. And I've gotten this all throughout. I've read Sacred Geometry from Rudolf Steiner, which is actually a pretty intense book. It was kind of hard for me to read. But then there's also like an introduction to symbolism, or how does it go? A beginner's guide to patterns or to symbols. I can't remember what it's called. Anyways, maybe I'll put a link to it in the description. But there's a few books that kind of really touch on exactly what to look for when you're seeing shapes like this. And one of the basic patterns you'll see is the square and the circle, right? So the square means earth, and the circle means heaven, generally speaking. This is going to come a lot more into play when I kind of step outside of blitzball to analyze all of Spira, right? But at the moment, you can at least say that in relation to the blitzball game, the square is the court. This is where all of the things happen, right? So you have all your outside influences. You have the gods, the angels, the demons. You have the cheers. You have the boos. You have the patterns. You have the music. You have the chants. You have the noise. That's all coming from outside of the earth, so to speak. It's all coming from the stands, right? And these are the onlookers as you're playing the game, right? Now, this is where the court happens. It's Earth, right? Well, it's Spira in this game. But the land is always a square, and the round, the circle is always the heaven, or the abstract realm. You could say that, because a circle doesn't have a point, right? There's an imaginary point somewhere in the center, here-ish, but it's imaginary. I think even Plato talked about that a little bit. There's an implied point, but you can't identify a point specifically on the circle itself. It's just implied in the middle somewhere. So This is the court of blitzball. This is where they play inside of the water, right? And you score your goals, and there's marks like this. Like, look at this particular one. If you look at the bottom, at the ground underneath the blitzball arena in Luca, you'll start to see some of these exact symbols on the ground there, like right there. So this is where you start, and you go whichever way you're going to go, right? And this is the game of blitzball. So what this mandala is saying in part is, hey, blitzball, like I mentioned, there are 8 teams. How many circles are there here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. There are 8 protrusions here to this shape, right? So you can conclude that this is referring to the 8 teams, and then they're kind of all competing against each other until it kind of comes down to this point here, right? This also is reminiscent of a flower, not just any flower, the hibiscus flower, which has 5 leaves. I get that. This is only 4, but these 4 leaves look like the hibiscus leaves. And so you see this is kind of like a blooming flower. This is the very center, and it kind of goes out up into the edges of this point here. So anybody who wants to define me on whether this is a blitzball game or not, I've got that one covered pretty dang well, right? Now, that doesn't give anything away about the game, however, and I've skipped some stuff. I really want to go into more depth about this soon. But for the most part, you can find all these symbols all around Luca, so that's great. Now, I want to talk about how this is relevant to Spira, because you'll see the exact same patterns I just talked about, except understand that this is Spira, right? Now, a fascinating thing about this square is that its corners are cut off. Now, why are the corners cut off? Well, they're going into this. They're going into this shape here and this this pattern here, which is reminiscent of water and specifically of the fireflies, right? Well, it's fascinating because these are fiends, right? This is the world that is like technically tied to Earth because there's a gap here, right? So this would be the actual far plane, would be somewhere like over here, right? But this is the elements of the far plane that are still tied to Earth. So these are all of the fiends that are trying to get to Earth. And the middle here is the summoner. Remember when Yuna is doing her sending, she is standing on top of a flower in the water and is sending all of the spirits out to the pleroma, right? So the energy of this mandala is pushing outward through these corners here, right? This is the contact. This is what you would call, this is where the worlds meet, right? And the worlds meet for the sending to be sent out, but it's also indicative of the fact that things from out can get in, right? So just understand there's a duality there. There's 2 things happening. So the fiends can come into the world, right? Or they stay in the world. It doesn't matter. So when you die, you're here. You're just hanging around waiting to be sent, right? And you'll find your way back into the world at some point as soon as you get one of these entry points, right? Which is also the exit points to be sent out here, because you can see the same symbol of the fireflies is found out here, right? Out at the very edge. So this is where the fireflies go. This is the actual far plane. It's all the way out here. Okay, so this is beautiful as a flower design because, as I mentioned, Yuna being symbolized by the flower, and specifically her standing on top of the flower when she does her sendings, you can imagine that Yuna is standing right here in the middle. But look at this. What shape is this? There's a big
There's a big X on there, yeah.
There's a big X. Now, when I first saw this mandala, I was like, who the fetch decided to just put an X in the middle? Like, what is this? Where was this decision made, right? Like, who decided, oh, there's this beautiful mandala. Let me, like, spray paint. Like, look at it. It looks like just a...
Yeah, like an X marks the spot kind of thing.
Yeah, like on top of it, you know? And at first glance, it looks like the X is done on top of it, right?
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to show some other things that are going to happen a little bit later. But initially, you can say that X means death. That's what it means. Even in Christianity, the cross means death. That is Christ dying. That is what that means, right? And the X is when people die in cartoons, you draw an X for their eyes, and everyone knows what that means, right? If they're sleeping, you'll just draw like a line. Everyone knows that's not death. As soon as you put an X on it, oh, they're dead, right? That's South Park with Kenny or whatever. Right? That's what X means. So X marks the spot, but when an X is on a person, that means that person is marked for death. You could just say that, something like that. Now, you can talk about the cross insignia being on a person. As long as they're resembling some type of Christ figure, it is kind of saying that they're going to die also, right? If even if it's just referencing the Christ story. That's not always 100% true, but as you read kind of this, I believe that's what this is saying. So this X right here is saying that Yuna will die, right? That's what this says, right? So you have the summoner standing on the middle of a flower, right, with the 8 ions, because I mentioned, now we're done with Blitzball now. Get rid of the Blitzball out of your head. The 8 teams of Blitzball are now the 8 ions. So once a summoner has all 8 ions, they now actually, I don't think they need all 8, but in the game there are 8. So this one's
right, because there's some 8. Of them are optional, but they're supposed to go to all of the temples.
Yes. So theoretically, somebody could summon the final Aeon with like 5 or 6, right? Is that correct?
I think 6.
Because you don't have to go and get all the ions, do you?
Yeah. You don't have to get all of them, though.
Well, by that same token, we don't do the final sending or the final Aeon either.
Yeah, we don't.
But,
true.
We could have. Yuna Leska was like, you can do it.
Yeah.
So, okay. So these are the 8 ions surrounding us in a flower of transcendence. So this is where I have to bring up what the number 8 means, right? And this is true across the board. This isn't just Western European stuff. This is true in China. This is true everywhere. And particularly in China and Japan because of the lotus flower. The lotus flower has 8 leaves going all around it, right? Now you can have a 9-leaf lotus. That's saying something else. But generally speaking, the white lotus, and this is more or less a white flower. You can see it here too as well, has 8 kind of points going out. And the word 8 or the number 8 means mediation and transformation. That's what that number means, right? And so through all 8 of the ions, the summoner is transformed into a dead summoner and does the thing that sends all of the power away in the different directions, right? And kind of does the work, right? But it all emanates out from the summoner. Now, there's a really interesting thing when you look really close here. This X is actually not on top of everything. It looks like it is, but it's not. You get another pattern over the X, which symbolizes that there's the possibility of overcoming death, of overcoming the necessity for death, which is what Yuna does, right? And this one's a 4-pointed flower, and 4, of course, means earth because 4 corners, just like a square, it just means like the world, right? But either way, there's something. When you analyze things, you're going by layers, right? And the X, although from a distance, the X looks like it's on top of everything. When you look at it closer, the X is actually, there's something on top of the X. There's something that transcends even the death that necessitates the summoners with all 8 of the ions in their mediation between heaven and earth, right? That's what a summoner does. They mediate between heaven and earth. Now, I don't want to get too like in the weeds with all of this because I'm just focusing on this part right now. But this part, this is the throne that Micah sits on when he watches Blitzball, right? It looks exactly like this.
Yeah.
There's another thing. This is also where Machen, when you see Machen on the at the Calmlands, Machen is standing there telling us the story of the Calmlands. Well, it's really apparent in this particular scene because when the camera goes behind Machen, you see that this is what he's wearing. His hat goes up in this point and it's got this weird kind of thing. And then his cape has this type of symbol going all the way down. And he's dressed kind of like a priest of Yevon, right? He's just kind of got the priestly attire. Well, that is this exact symbol, but well, okay, then I'll tell you the next part where you see this. There's 3 parts where you see this symbol. This one you'll notice is a little different, right? Mm-hmm. So this one is like the thrones or Machen's back, but then you have 4 of these going up, right?
Right.
And these ones don't protrude the same exact distance, well, at least not in the HD version. Yeah, gosh, the HD version is quite a bit different, actually. But there's a big difference between this one and this one, right? And this one, I believe, is talking about the 4 masters of Yevon, right? So these are the 4. And one of the good ways that I can have a confirmation on this is when you first see Seymour, before he knows that we're trying to trick him and kill him, when we first go to Guadosalam, you will see the entrance to Seymour's, like his room with all the food and the room he has everyone wait in. It is flanked on each side by 3 of these exact things, kind of like drapes hanging down, but they look exactly like this. And there's 3 of them, then there's the door, and then 1, 2, 3. There's 3 again. And this is correct. Go back to Guadosalam, and you'll be able to see within Seymour's kind of waiting quarters that this symbolism is there too. And he is one of the maesters, right? So that to me is a good confirmation that this symbolizes the maesters. There's 4 of them, just like there are 4 maesters. By the end of this game, all 4 of them are dead. Early on in the game, 2 of the 4 were still dead. There's a fun part about this being the far plane, and that the maesters are coming from the far plane, overextending their bounds into the abstract patterns that govern the world of Spira.
Oh.
From the far plane.
Yeah.
It's basically telling you that the maesters are dead.
Yeah.
It's telling you that in this mandala. The maesters are dead. They're coming from the far plane. They're exerting their influence well beyond where they're supposed to be. And they're getting into, this would be kind of the patterns and just the laws of nature and the heavens, right, so to speak. But they're moving towards Earth from where they're not supposed to be, right? Now, these ones would essentially be like empty thrones, or just the general idea of the priests. Or even through Machen, the stories, right? Just the history and the myths, right? That the myths are coming from the far plane also, and interfering in the natural kind of function of the patterns and laws that govern the world of Spira. So you got all these outside forces coming inward. And so you can see the energy coming outward, inward, only at a few points. Now I say point, well, I'll just say that I don't know if I should say this, but there is phallic imagery here as well, which is part of the idea of something along the lines of a patriarchy. Okay, you put it that way.
Sure.
That is sticking its nose where it doesn't belong, and seeding the patterns and the surrounding laws that govern Spira with their own outside influence. Okay. This is important to note because within the Earth, the pattern is actually going outward. So from the center going out, you see all of the energy is moving out. That's how all of this is flowing. It's going out through this 8-leaf flower, through this transformation, this mediation that's pushing things outward into this realm. But then you have a counter force, which is the church, which is Yevon, which is forcing itself inward against the will of what's happening on Spira, right? Against what the summoners are doing. They're actually at odds.
An oppression is going on, yeah.
They may not even know it, but they're not on the same team. They're fighting against each other. But this summoner will shoot out the spirits out to this direction and this way, and then these guys are trying to exert their influence, from the outside coming in. Oh my gosh. Did I miss anything? I mean, that's more or less what this all means.
That's pretty crazy.
If anybody, do you think I'm onto something here, or am I talking crazy?
No, I don't think you are at all. I think a lot of that makes a lot of sense. And it's pretty, if it's all intentional, which I suppose is impossible to...
Dude, this has to be, because all the other temples don't have nearly, not even close to as complex of a mandala structure
as Besaid would, yeah. And
none of them are saying anything that difficult to read. Most of them is just the willy-wily waves of the flames, and the fire god, the fire aeon Ifrit is in that temple, and the other ones, the crystals of ice that are, that's the ice one, But this one is like the whole freaking game.
Yeah.
It's Blitzball and Spira and the whole game just summarized beautifully. I've never seen it done this well.
Yeah.
And I can read symbols, and I've never seen it done this well. And it's for Final Fantasy X. Like I almost am in disbelief at how perfectly this comes together and just like fits into the theme of the game. And how if you have an eye to see and if you already know some things about the world ahead of time,
sure, yeah,
that you would look at this mandala and be like, oh man, like you already know what's going to happen in
yeah,
the whole game.
it tells you everything. Yeah, I think so.
Okay, now anybody who has some ideas or anybody who sees something here that I didn't see, let me know.
I had a really,
there's a few things where I'm like, but what does this mean? You know, why? How many? Because there's like 12 circles going out. Well, what does that mean? There's 16 of these going around. Well, what does that mean? You know,
yeah.
like some of these numbers I look at and I'm thinking it could mean one thing or another. I don't know. But one important thing to note, though, I do have to say this, Mike. Hold your thought, though. Don't forget that there is a separation here. There is a separation between this world and then the outer world, right? And this right here is that separation. These worlds aren't connected necessarily, right? So you send something out to the far plane and it doesn't, like it's gone, you know? Like these spirits are stuck here. They can't go here except unless they're sent and then possibly received. That could be what this is, but I don't think so. But the fact that they're separate, just like in Blitzball, how everyone playing Blitz is separate from everyone watching it, right? There's a separation here that is just perfectly illustrated by just having a gap. They could have done all sorts of things to illustrate that there's a separation, but instead they just made a gap here. There's just nothing for this part. And then you have the wide world of the heavens going around it. And that's just beautiful. So the pleroma the far plane that we see interacting with the Earth here isn't the real far plane. That's separate. They're separated. Okay, say your thing.
Well, what I was going to say is actually, it's likely pretty dumb. I
doubt it.
I struggle with symbols.
Really?
It's actually made me kind of interested in reading some of the books that you mentioned because,
I should look them up then.
Like for the novel that I'm writing, I have to describe some insignias. Actually, bring that back up again if you can.
Oh, okay.
I have to describe like some insignias and things like that, and I'm always at a loss for like how do I, describe something, a symbol that like has a meaning for, this sort of like culture of this, nation or whatever. And I always struggle in like, okay, how do I do that? So anyway, that's sort of a separate thing, but that's why I think what I'm going to say is probably not that like profound. But if you go all the way to the center again,
okay.
You're talking about like Yuna standing there, right? And like the X marks the spot, death.
At the center of the flower,
it almost looks like
she's
there's
the hibiscus. She's the stem. Remember that.
Yeah,
that
right.
Symbolism is very intentional. She's the stem of the flower. That's this point right here.
The center there almost looks like a sort of microcosm of the mandala itself. So there's like the square and the circle thing.
Yes, I did kind of see that. Yeah, you're right.
And I wondered if maybe that being on top of the summoner is some representation of the cycle of Spira, where the summoner, like the world inside of the world kind of thing, it just keeps going.
Yes, like a fractal. Yes,
yeah.
Actually. So were the camera to keep zoom. I think I see what you're
saying.
Goes
in,
to zoom in on
and it would zoom in again, and it would be the world again and again and again.
I actually really like that because I didn't quite know what to make of this because it's kind of a square. And it's kind of a circle around it. And it's like, yeah, there's another world within another heaven, but it's kind of sectioned off into
it's not that's the part that doesn't fit what I was thinking is the big cross thing.
I think your idea there actually has a decent chance of being right. Because I think that this mandala was clearly, if we're going to talk about the lore of the game, right? They made this mandala not thinking that Yuna was going to break their whole system.
Yeah.
Right. Now, I don't know if this is a game design thing or if this is actually like a what would you call it? Like a didactic thing within Spira that they designed it to mean all of these things. They probably designed it just to mean Blitzball is probably what it was really supposed to be saying. And definitely that symbolism is there, as I talked about. But the idea that, this is what summoners do, and then there's a new one in the middle, and that the typical summoner would just renew the cycle again. I think then your interpretation holds perfectly. I actually really like it. But at the same time, this meaning that Yuna transcends it with a new world is kind of
That
the
could be
way
it
that
too.
I was going with it.
Yeah, I could see that too. All right.
Okay,
Anything
people,
else?
now you can fight me. You can fight me about this. Tell me I'm smoking weed, just like looking at symbols too much, reading too much into it. But to my credit, I did not see this level of symbolism in any other mandala. So it's not like I'm just seeing things everywhere, you know? It was only this one. So yeah. Just remember that.
Okay. Good stuff. It'll be interesting to see what people think about that. All right, now.
Hey, maybe there's some people who read symbols better than I do who even have some more ideas. So I'd love to hear it.
Yeah. For the next half hour, I want to go over some stuff from that people left in comments. I'm going to start on Patreon. There's a few people asking some questions on Patreon, and then I'll go over to the video itself. So this one comes from Hassan Al-Azemi. Good day to you all. I want to thank you for your efforts and would like to ask some simple questions about FF10 before the last episode. Number one, if Dream Xanarkand's people are just memories, how can they reproduce or have babies like Tidus or the sports announcer in the beginning of the game who's mentioning the birth of his son?
Well, I had a brief idea. I don't know how high a chance this has of being correct, but the idea that maybe there's like a Groundhog's Day kind of thing coming here.
Where they replay like a similar time over and over again.
Day over, because I don't know how far you can get. Like, it's been 1,000 years, and they're still doing the same thing. The same.
You'd have to. You would think it'd have to be something like that, because
something like that.
The life of the Faith before they became Faith would have only been so long. Some of them are little children, like the boy, right? So they only have, let's say, 10 years of experience to even draw from, anyways. So they would have to be reliving some period of time recycled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it couldn't be the day, right? Because Tidus has all these memories from
maybe it's 10 years. I mean, 10 years seems reasonable given that's the time period it takes for Sin to come. Well, it's actually shorter than that, but
now I'm full of radical ideas that people say, "Oh, good idea, but that's wrong." Like, fine, I won't be offended if that's just totally out of base or off base. There we go. But it would be crazy if the Faith were dreaming up new people every day and replacing them for thousands of years, for 1,000 years, and just dreaming up new people and not ever reusing the same old people from before. I feel like there's a regeneration thing happening, and that Tidus has been around for a very long time.
Yeah. Yeah, so the idea here is, I mean, the way that Hassan puts this, if they're just memories, I wouldn't say just. That's kind of like the way that people... That's kind of the way that people have viewed this plot twist throughout, like, the discourse on FF10. Oh, he's just a dream after all. Like, that sucks. Like, oh, I don't like that.
Yeah.
It's not that. Like, they aren't just memories or just a dream. They are made manifest in the world in the same way that aeons are. So in the same way that Valifor is a real physical thing that comes into Spira, that fights and takes damage and is a physical presence in the world of Spira, the people of Dream Xanarkand are also real and physical in the world of Spira. They're just separated from Spira in such a way that the people of Spira can't go to Dream Xanarkand. But it is a physical place. It is being summoned. So, he is a real physical person. It's just that the way that person was created through a process using pyreflies came from the minds of the Faith. So they sort of they use their memory as a foundation or as a source to create in their minds what Xanarkand looked like and all the people that lived there and their daily activities, which I suppose would include people giving birth and new people coming into the city and people dying and all of that, so that it would be like a normal society. They're thinking of all of this. They're dreaming it and thinking it like actively, which is why they're so exhausted, because they've been doing it for 1,000 years, sitting there like constantly sort of like thinking of the place.
And that then, may be because you mentioned that there was a person that Titus was likely
yes, Shuyin, yeah.
Yeah, Shuyin. And it's almost like they had probably when they first imagined Xanarkand, Shuyin was just Shuyin. But after 1,000 years, it's like every time they need to bring him back, they keep reusing different elements, or they make him slightly different each time.
Yeah.
And before you know it, he's like Titus now. It's like a totally different evolution, you know?
Yeah. I would, based on the conversation we had about memory in our Vagrant Story podcast, if you've not seen our Vagrant Story podcast, I suggest watching it. Memory is not like a file system where you store what happened in a little slot in your brain, and then you just go recall it, when you need that file again. That's not the way that memory actually works. Memory, they're discovering, is actually a creative process. You use the creative parts of your brain in recalling memories. So each time, actually, that you recall your memories, there are parts of it that change each time.
Yes. Yep. Without even knowing it.
And so, like, the way that a person would recall a memory right after the event happened would be really accurate to what happened. But like 2 years later, there will be so many elements when they're recalling that memory that have changed that it's almost like 50% different now. Yeah. And that continues like throughout your life. Of course, there are some things that imprint a little more strongly and you'll remember them more accurately, and other things that you'll forget more. But on average, a person sort of changes about 50% of the details of memory after like 2 years. So I would assume that after 1,000 years of active memory recall, that the Faith are not getting every detail of the original Xanarkand right at all.
That's more or less what I mean. How Titus is
transformed into from
Shuyin.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, well, they just slowly remember a different thing each time, and before long, it's like, did you have blonde hair or black hair? I can't remember.
Yeah. So, anyways, it's not just that they're memories; they are real, in the sense that an Aeon is real when it's summoned. It's just that they are being created in the minds of the Faith, and then made real through a summoning process that Yu Yevon is doing. So Yu Yevon is using those Faith to summon Dream Xanarkand and make it real. Does that make sense? So like every aspect of the society of Xanarkand is being sort of created through the remembering process that the Faith are doing all the time in that mountain. It makes sense,
but it's hard
to grasp. But
but it makes sense that that's likely the process through which it was done and how things kind of
changed
over time and change. Yeah, although they don't change much, right?
Yeah. Okay. Second question from Hassan, or you got something?
Just the names of the books. A Beginner's Guide to Constructing the Universe.
Oh, okay, yeah.
That was
the other book you were thinking of.
Yeah, that was the other one that I was thinking of. And then there's another one called like a dictionary of symbols. And then of course the other one that I talked about, Sacred Geometry by Rudolf Steiner. Okay, anyways. Okay, second question.
Second question is, how can Titus see his mother in the far plane if she wasn't a real person? Which also brings another question. How can people from Dream Xanarkand die or become the final Aeon? Because they are made real. They are made real through the summoning process. They are physically present. They are real.
So it doesn't have to be a separate human or anything. It just needs to be, if anything was made real at any point, it can then be recalled.
Yes.
Through the Guaro Salam or something like that.
Yes. So in terms of like how can Jecht become the final Aeon, right? He's not just this ethereal thing. He's a physical presence, right? And I actually forgot to mention this. When you fight Jecht inside of Sin at the end of the game, one of the final bosses, that is the final Aeon form of Jecht that you are fighting. So like,
where he's like the big bearded
yes,
dude, like,
yes, that's what he transformed into.
That's what he looks like as a final Aeon.
Correct.
That.
Yes.
And then Sin Yu Yevon just kind of shows up and
merges with the final Aeon. Yeah. So
okay.
Jecht the man, when he became the final Aeon, transformed into that monstrous sort of version of himself that you fight. That's the final Aeon of Jecht. Jecht as a final Aeon, right? Now, as far as how can Tita see his mother in the far plane, my headcanon on this is that the Al Bhed are closer to being right on what's happening in the far plane than the people who follow Yevon. They aren't actually seeing these people. I think the Fireflies are showing them images of people that they knew. So the Fireflies are sort of going into their memories and sort of showing them the image of a person they're thinking of. So I think Tidus is seeing his mother because he's thinking of his mother at the time the Fireflies are making his mother manifest. So that would be my explanation for why he can see her, despite the fact that she's a dream but she was a real person too, because she was summoned. So she was also a physical, real person in Dream's End.
She had an embodiment, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's almost maybe there's like a memory to the Fireflies, where if something has been manifest, if the pattern of a thing has been manifest before, then the Fireflies can re-manifest it again in accordance with whatever pattern you're projecting with your mind, right?
Right.
And they're like, oh, we can do that. We've done that one before. Whether they're dead or not, there's still a weird kind of issue there where they can't do it if they're not dead. But there is one thing that kind of, I think, bolsters what you're saying here, and that was in the audio drama that we don't have to talk about. But I did listen to it. It's interesting. I don't know a ton of what's going on there. I'd assume I'd had to have played 10-2
probably
as well to get that. But I did listen to the drama. At least at one point in the drama, it is mentioned that somebody decided to remember Sin in the far plane, well, in a place like Guadosalam, or was able to kind of use the Fireflies to reproject Sin based on their own memory, right? And then now Sin's back, and now everyone has to fight Sin.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but it's based on, somebody went to the place where the Fireflies were, to the Moonflow or something, and just thought of Sin, and now Sin's back. He's going to kill everything. It's like, dang it, man. That's a big problem if that's how this works. Yeah. But
you got to close off the freaking far plane to people.
Well, exactly. Well, because theoretically, with what you're saying, Sin was a real manifest thing, despite being made of Fireflies. That could easily just be re-manifest if somebody just goes and remembers it when they're in a place with Fireflies. Sure. And so because that's in the audio drama, I would say that is likely what you're saying is likely how it works, even though the audio drama is not something I recommend anybody listen to. It was weird.
The final part of this, how do they die? Again, the same way that Aeons die in battle, right? They're defeated and they sort of go back to the mind of the faith that is dreaming them, but then they can be summoned again. As long as the faith is alive, that is thinking or remembering or creating the Aeon in its mind, the summoner can bring it out again. So as long as the faith are alive and dreaming, Tidus could technically be killed, but then kind of come back through Yu Yevon's summoning. I would think. But the real death for Tidus, like true death, happens when the faith stop dreaming. When they're no longer actively creating him in their minds. Now, there was a point on this that I did not know. This comes from Flex Offender on YouTube that I want to read because this was fascinating and it changes my perception of the ending a little bit. I think we had both agreed in our interpretation that Tidus is being kind of made into a real boy, again, the Pinocchio thing.
He's a real dude.
In the ending. Yeah. But I actually like this way better now. So, Flex Offender says, if you go back to the Chambers of the Faith and talk to them, you get to see scenes of them talking to the party in their human form. If you beat Dark Shiva, which is an optional super boss, and go back and talk to her in her chamber, she says to Tidus, please do not get angry. We will dream of new oceans for you to swim. And now what happens to Tidus after the ending credits? He wakes up in a new ocean, right? So what it seems to me is happening there is that this is a sort of afterlife for Tidus, where the Faith somehow, in their death, are continuing to dream of him in their afterlife and creating new oceans for him to swim, like an afterlife for him, if that makes sense. Now, I'm going to read the rest of Flex Offender's comment here. This game has had me thinking that it explains not only how its own magic and summoning system works, but maybe even what the crystals are, and how the many worlds of Final Fantasy are related. To me, the Farplane Fireflies seem very similar to the life stream of FF7, where the spirits of the dead flow through, energize, and exist elsewhere in the world of the living. Not so much that the Farplane is a space that the Fireflies are connected to, but a parallel abstract realm that they are able to manifest or display images of. If Fireflies are the power source used to create sin, as well as the foundation of summoning aeons through dreams, it makes sense to me that all the magic in the world works by using this power source, which is essentially the spirits of the dead, which make up the base energy of the universe.
Yep.
Now, here's where I get crazy with it. It seems to me that this is how things work in Final Fantasy 7, 9, and 10 very explicitly. The life stream in 7, the spirits of the dead being harvested in 9 by the Terrans, and the far plane or sin in FF10. In 9 specifically, you're even told that this world is created and maintained by the crystal that is the main motif of Final Fantasy. This made me start thinking, what if Spira, Dreams Anarchind, and every other world in Final Fantasy is essentially working the same way? They're being brought into being by the dreams of the Faith and then kept empowered by the re-energized... Hold on. Sorry, I'm reading this wrong. And then kept empowered and re-energized by the same spiral of death that can only be escaped once we, the player, from a different dream, interrupt the cycle and cause the dream to end by beating the game. So this is sort of like a meta element he's throwing into it.
Yeah.
And to the eternity that the characters would have been trapped in the dream had no one ever interfered. Really interesting comment there, but
that's fascinating. I like that.
The part there specifically, please do not get angry, we will dream of new oceans for you to swim. That, to me, feels like that what we're seeing Tidus wake up in at the end of the game is like an afterlife that the Faith have created for him in their afterlife. Now, that's not official Square Enix canon given Final Fantasy X-2, but we've already talked about how, or I at least have talked about how sequels tend to undermine some of the themes of the original game in an attempt to just continue things.
Well, hold on, because that gets even more meta. Because think about that. You got this world that they thought that they won, and then you're forcing them to go back through the same thing again, just to make money. Square Enix is Yevon. Think about this.
Well, they're
exerting their influence.
They're also Shinra. You've heard people talking about like the NFTs, like Square Enix embracing NFTs and stuff like that.
Are they? I didn't know.
And how they made a game in Final Fantasy VII about an evil corporation who harvests sort of this, like world destroying or like unfriendly sort of like policy that's destroying the world, and NFTs being, anyways. So yes, right.
It's funny, they've created a thing where they are their own bad guys, right? They're their own enemies.
They've become. You live long enough to see yourself become the enemy.
That's it. Exactly.
Okay. Let me fly through this a little bit.
Okay.
I'm actually going to move on from Hassan real quick. Sorry I didn't get to the rest of that there. I want to go to Robert Malt real quick. Actually, no. I'm going to skip that one too. Sorry, Robert. I'll talk to you about that again, like by responding to your comment in Patreon. Here's one from Jimmy Dudley. I'm not sure if this is where messages are sent for the podcast or not, but here's mine. Do you make anything of the connection that is clearly shown in Final Fantasy VII Remake with Shinra from Final Fantasy X, or do you think that's just some sort of joke for the devs? I don't remember the reference you're talking about in FF7 Remake, but I do know that they named a character Shinra in Final Fantasy X-2 for the purpose of connecting the world of Final Fantasy X to the world of Final Fantasy VII to make them the same world. I think this is a horrible retcon that was clearly not the intention of the original Final Fantasy X, but rather the philosophy of Yuichi Wada, who became the president shortly after Final Fantasy X's release, or maybe even shortly before, I don't know, and who wanted to make sequels to everything to make more money. So they found a way to do it.
Well, that was a fad at the time, actually. The Disney CEO, Eisner,
Yeah.
I think his last name was Eisner.
Eisner,
in the mid-90s, he took over Disney, and he was like, we're doing sequels, man. We're doing sequels for everything.
All those direct-to-video sequels.
It kind of tanked Disney for a while. Like, Disney had issues around that time, and then they had to get rid of him for Bob Iger, who was able to actually kind of help them make new stuff again, you know? Mm-hmm. But that's funny. Square Enix basically had the exact same thing happen.
Yeah. Not a fan of it. I do not believe that was the original intention of the game, to be connected to Final Fantasy VII in any way. Sakaguchi never wanted direct sequels for Final Fantasy games to be made.
Do you think that was just them just saying like, haha, screw you, Sakaguchi?
I don't think they're saying that. I think that they genuinely just thought that it was a better business model to make sequels to things. And so...
Because, you know, these games are Sakaguchi's children.
Yeah, in a way.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
And the unholy union, it's like incest. Well, you're mixing 7 and 10 together in a way that produces this monster, you know? It's like, you don't do that.
Yeah.
Leave Sakaguchi's children alone.
Now this is not to say that Final Fantasy X-2 is a horrible game or something. I do have problems philosophically with the way it's done, but it's actually a pretty fun game. It's actually a pretty fun game.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what you said last time. I'm glad you say this, because the way I talk, I haven't even played 10-2. I just don't like sequels, period. So I'm not dissing 10-2 anybody. I'm dissing all sequels everywhere.
Yeah.
Except for like 5 of the ones that I happen to like. Right?
Almost
all the time, it's not a good idea.
Unless you're writing your story with the intention of there being a continuation from the start, right? And you have like a 3-act sort of trilogy planned out.
Like Avatar: The Last Airbender. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which did it well, because they weren't, clearly, and they didn't stretch it forever. That's the thing I hate, because there's rumors about Final Fantasy X-3 floating around, and even still, after all this time.
What doesn't tend to work for me is when you write a story with a beginning, middle, and end, and that was supposed to end there, and there was no intention to do a sequel, but, oh my goodness, it was successful. We should capitalize on the success of this thing and continue it because the people want the characters more. That's where it becomes messy from a narrative sort of planning stage. And you've got to find a way to keep it going when it wasn't intended to, and it wraps up really nicely. And I feel like 10 does that. So, anyway. I don't know if that exactly answers the question for Jimmy, but it's best I can do. Okay, now, let's go back over here to... And we're not going to be able to get through every comment, but I want to try my best to get to the best ones. Okay, here's a good one. Karafine, regarding the extent of control of the Faith, my interpretation is that Jecht, Auron, and the Faith are all separate entities with their own plans, so to speak, and it is Jecht who sets everything else into motion.
I read this comment, yes. I think that's probably correct.
Yeah.
I think that's probably right, that Jecht... So the question is, how Tidus has Bahamut that follows him all around.
Yes.
Guides him and tells him what to do. Did Jecht have someone following him around telling him what to do? And I would say the evidence for that is none. I don't think we have any evidence for that.
No.
So it could be that what I interpreted as the Faith are just manipulating all of this stuff. It could easily be that Jecht shows up and then the Faith get the idea after Jecht becomes Sin, that it was Jecht's idea. And then the Faith are like, I see where this is going. Let's see what we can do. And then
we can capitalize on this situation.
Which does bother a little bit my theory that Tidus and Jecht were set up to hate each other, to have that type of relationship. Where they basically hate each other, but they're still close. Like, they love and hate each other in the most extreme possible ways. I like that theory. It may not be correct.
It still is in a sense, though.
Right, because Jecht wasn't really as bad as Tidus remembers.
They would have to have dreamed this relationship anyways. Whether they did it with the intention... Whether they did it originally with the intention of setting up this perfect scenario where the son goes after the father or not, they still created that scenario and then said, we can use it for our purposes of ending the dream.
You're right. So was it planned ahead of time? Maybe, maybe not, probably not, but it was still set up by them, whether they knew that they had set up this perfect situation or not. Maybe not. Probably not.
Yeah. So let's see. He goes on, when you revisit some of the faith after getting the airship, they make reference to how long they had forgotten to move forward and to change, and that it was you, the party, or Titus, who reminded them that they need to. So no, I don't think it was the faith themselves that started it all intentionally back from making Jecht. Jecht became a hero by happenstance, and this woke up the faith from their lethargy. They did start forming ideas and taking some more control from then onwards, although it's mostly limited to just being visions Bahamut's faith gives to Titus. It also feels like it fits FF10 quite a bit more for Jecht to have been the one to disrupt a long, stale, and stagnant people rather than it being some master plan from the faith all along. I think that that's reasonable, yeah.
A lot of the ideas that I have are kind of just to get people thinking about other ways to interpret the game.
Well, yeah.
Necessarily because I know anything about the lore, because I don't.
That's the purpose of a book club in the first place, right?
Exactly.
It's people to sort of like bounce their ideas off each other, and together you sort of work towards like, okay, this makes the most sense, right?
Yeah.
Let me keep going down here. King of the Sharks is talking about when Titus begins to disappear and he jumps off the airship at the end and goes for the clouds and sees Braska and his father and like high fives him and stuff.
Yeah.
He says, when Titus jumps off the ship, I don't believe it's simply him remembering those three people. Why would Braska be among the first three he thinks about when his life ends? I lean towards the scene I lean towards the scene stylistically or smoothly transitioning into the farplane. It just looks like Titus is still falling from the ship since the Firefly-rich farplane has the same color clouds as the one from Sin's recent fart. Plus, it just makes sense that Braska, Arn, and Jecht were already chilling together in the afterlife or farplane, and now Titus has joined them. As Mike brought up, the Aeons burst into Fireflies and were most likely sent to the farplane just as any other sentient being. This kind of goes along with what was asked earlier about how do the people of Dreams Anarchan die, right? Can they go to the farplane? It seems like the Aeons are going to the farplane, so something to that effect is happening. Titus saw his mother in the farplane. His mother was also a dream. I think fulfilled, unsent, deactivated faith, and their Aeons can all find their way or be sent to FF10's heaven, just as any normal dead person. I don't believe the farplane is 100% Fireplight illusions with no sentient souls, as demonstrated by Jiskel's desperate sphere delivery. Okay. Let's see. That kind of goes over some of the same stuff we've already talked about. Oh, this was actually kind of interesting. So, Mega Man EXE79 gives a personal theory here. I know the Ultimania says that Dreams Anarchan exists out in the deep ocean. But when I played FF10, my uninfluenced interpretation after watching the credits was that the water pillar at Mount Gagazet was Dreams Anarchan.
I saw this comment as well. I did wonder that too. And who's to say that Xanarkand is necessarily even the same scale?
Yeah.
Right, they could be little tiny people, you know?
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know, because I also read the replies to that comment, and it seems like, I don't know. I think it's got a decent chance of being right, but at the same time, there's the convenience problem, which is that Dreams Anarchan was just right there. It was just right there.
Right, the whole time.
Not to say that's an easy place to get to, but many people have gotten there before, and no one's like...
Not exactly a great... Well, it could be, in a way, a place to protect, right? Because it's like right under people's nose. People don't expect it. Like, that's the best hiding place. But at the same time, it seems like Sin protects Dreams Anarchind, it would make more sense that it's out away from people. I don't know.
That's what you would think. That's what I would think personally. Yeah.
But I do think that that's an interesting thought, and this is something that someone else was asking me. I think it was Chocolate Rob was asking if we could kind of touch on is the level of canonicity of material that comes after the game's release, like an Ultimania or something like that, right?
I know, because sometimes they outsource the Ultimania to like a company that's not related to Square Enix, and they give them some tips, and then it's just kind of filled out from there.
Even if they don't do that, even if it is written internally, there's certainly a lot of room for even the creator to continue retconning or changing things as they see fit. This was definitely true of the Xenogears Ultimania, which was not called that. It was called Perfect Works.
Yeah.
Where he continued to try to expand the universe through like the creation of that book.
Yeah.
And so there are
like
things.
A ton.
Yeah. There are things that don't necessarily like align consistently between the text of the game and the material written afterwards, even when it's done by like the creator themselves, right?
Yeah. Okay.
So, this is kind of something there's not really a great answer for, but certainly Square has contradicted the texts of the games that they've made Ultimanias for with the Ultimanias, and it creates like kind of new problems, and sometimes the creators are or are not very involved in the creations, or at least even in giving much like feedback or what's the word I'm looking for? Consultation on how to like make those things align. So it's really hard to say, but sometimes the Ultimanias, a lot of times the Ultimanias will have really interesting info that make things easier to understand or connect better, and sometimes they feel inconsistent, and you got to kind of pick and choose depending on who you are, which you think is the case. All in all, like, your personal headcanon is really all that matters in the end, as far as I'm concerned. But like, do accept what like makes it work for you, right? And that's kind of a fluid process. Like, even for me, my headcanon of FF10's lore will change depending on if I hear a theory from someone here that goes like, oh, like, that's actually kind of cool. I'll accept that into my understanding or my reading of it, right? So it's a fluid thing. Do as you will with that information. Did you, before I read another one, do you have any comments that you had seen that you wanted to respond to, or any in particular?
No, not necessarily. I
Okay.
mean, I read through a bunch of the comments. We just have really good comments. One of the things that I really wanted to mention is just to encourage people throughout this whole series to read the comments on each episode of these podcasts.
Yes.
Because they're really good. There's some really thoughtful comments, and we can never get to even 1% of them, but like, they're really good. And there's some really, really informed people who have some really cool and interesting ideas, and can really, just really open-minded types of people as well. The comment section is great. It's really good on our videos, I've noticed.
After you've finished the game, so you can avoid spoilers, definitely go back through the videos. Through the videos and read the comments.
That's right. Well, but if you're watching this, okay, you're done, right?
You would have finished by now. Here's a good one from Leander. I'd compare Yevon's form to a tick, a parasite holding on to Spira.
Oh, that's better than a spider.
Way better.
I love that.
Way better.
Oh,
I like this a lot. It's like he's a parasite holding on to Spira, right?
Yes, that's so good. I was thinking about the spider, and I was like, okay, like, kind of.
It does look like a tick. It looks way more like a tick.
It looks more like a tick. It looks a lot more like a tick. Oh, that's beautiful. I love that.
This person is bringing up a question about the nucleus.
Oh, yeah. Let
me read it. I don't know if this is a theory on this person's part, but it could expand on the questions we had. This is from Strinalis. I've had the same question on my mind regarding the nucleus of sin and where we see the Crusaders' souls entering. We don't really know that the sending is the one and only way to send souls to the afterlife. That's been part of the teachings of Yevon, which we already can discount as a reliable source. Only summoners can perform it, and we know summoning was perfected by Xanarkan mages like Yu Yevon. And the same Yu Yevon who 1,000 years ago cast a spell that effectively summoned a bunch of Pyreflies to one location, crafting the unholy armor of sin. What if the sending is just a tool to guide nearby Pyreflies to one specific location? You can send them to the far plane, as is the tradition, which is nice because it seems to have some Guado-made barrier that prevents them from leaving ever again. But perhaps any large enough concentration of Pyreflies could be marked as a destination for other Pyreflies to gather at, and perhaps it's only through a large gathering of them that it's possible for some to cross over to the actual afterlife, like an event horizon or a black hole. Event horizon of a black hole. I think the reason summoners are still needed to perform the sending, as the common people know it, is because yes, sin may be absorbing some souls to replenish what is lost, but it's like a mindless animal killing without discretion just to keep the cycle going. Summoners are still needed to follow in its wake to send what remains to a secure location like the far plane at Guadasalam. The Crusaders at Mihen actually put up a decent fight and penetrated some of Sin's defenses, so in the wake of that battle, it may have been hungrier than usual and feasted on more souls than it would usually take it. I could see that. I think that makes some sense.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean, I like it.
Yeah. This is from Roberto Carlos Piera Costa. One of my questions is about Sin's motivations to destroy all technology in Spira. Was it because of the fear to be overcome by science and eventually leading people to pray less to consequently nerf Yu Yevon? One more thing, Seymour has an extra dialogue if you summon Anima during his last fight against you. Thus, just a thought about how Seymour could get into Sin. I guess he confronted Sin off-screen at some point after Gagazet, or was absorbed by Sin, and once inside he used his powers to remain as an unsent and alive. So, I like that last part. If we're talking about Sin taking dead souls into itself, right?
Yeah.
That could be how...
Dead. He could just approach Sin and just like absorb into him.
And then his will being strong enough to remain unsent inside gave him the opportunity to try to like take over it somehow.
Yes.
The first part...
that's
Sin's motivation to destroy all technology in Spirit was because of the fear to be overcome by science and eventually leading people to pray less. I don't think Sin's motivation has anything to do with you or with Yevon. With Yevon. Or he says Yu Yevon, though. Hold on.
What was Yu Yevon's original? Why did Yu Yevon hate the Machina so much? And it's because the Machina were going to destroy his whole freaking...
Well, Bavel used... Because Xanarkan had Machina.
Yes.
But Bavel's Machina was more advanced.
Yeah.
So I think Sin was created as this like Machina destroying like...
Well, it's an equalizer.
Yeah.
Right? So you shake up the board and let the pieces fall in different places. So it's like Bavel has better stuff than Xanarkan. Well, what if we just get rid of all the Machina? Now we're both on a level playing field,
sure.
Right? Whereas at the rate things were going, Bavel was just going to swallow up Xanarkan.
Yeah, I could see that.
That's what I think.
I like
also,
that.
There's like, just the general concerns of Machina eventually going to destroy the world, right?
Nick Bros has a clarification here on when the Dark Aeons appear, because I had forgot exactly when that happened.
Oh yeah, when was it?
The Dark Aeons appear after Bavel, and are essentially an addition to the plot in a sense as hostile summoners attacking you in Yevon's name. In many cases, they are quite literally blocking your path to somewhere. I think the one probably most infamous is Dark Valifor, as it blocks you from getting Auron's final limit break if you did not get the memory sphere before Bavel, as it is probably the least realistic to have done before this point, because you have to go all the way back to Besaid. But there are other examples too, such as blocking Anima's acquisition if you didn't get the hidden temple treasures, or blocking an item required for Tidus's ultimate weapon. I don't know how I feel about this. It is cool, but having maxed out my characters to fight penance, it's also kind of mean. So just wanted to read that real quick. Oh, he says also, now that we're finally past Zanarkand, the other thing I find ironic about the little boat journey over the ruined city is that while Yevon was shunned to this city for its use of Machina, leading it to ruin. We're talking about, I think, when the shoe puff is going over the flooded city.
Oh, that city. Yeah, okay, maybe.
Let me make sure I'm right about that. I think that's what he's referencing here. They regard Zanarkand as a holy place, despite it both being the ruins of a highly advanced civilization who used Machina, and also the fact that it was Bavel that nearly destroyed it using Machina. Pretty hypocritical, if you ask me. There's a lot of hypocrites in the world of spirit.
Yeah. I can understand why Zanarkand is a holy place, though, and it has to do with the fact that Yevon, it was the reason Yevon started all of this. It's the reason why the faith are doing any of what they're doing, right? So I think that does rub off on the religion in general, that they had some control over that in some minor way, to still shape the perspective, to be like, no, think whatever you want, teach whatever you want, but Zanarkand was a good place and an important place, and don't start thinking that it's not, because the whole reason we're doing this is to keep Zanarkand pristine and perfect how it was.
This one comes from Monk Funky. The thank you line from Yuna has a little more meaning to it in my mind. I am a native Japanese speaker. Mm-hmm. The fact that I love you is culturally awkward is true, but I think thank you actually carries a more wide range of meanings to it when she says it to Titus.
But that is the problem, though, is that it does carry such a wide range of meaning. Like arigato can be said to
that's just Japanese in general, right? Like the structure of Japanese in general, there's so many ways to say yes.
Yes. But you would never say the I love you things to a stranger on the street, Yeah. Like, part of the issue is that it is so broad. But I do get what he's saying, that arigato can, in certain contexts, like this one, have a very deep meaning.
Did I mention, did you hear the part where I said that this person is a native Japanese speaker?
Yeah, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So...
I'm not discounting what he said. I'm just saying, but that is, when translating Japanese to English, that is part of the problem.
Oh, sure, yeah.
But arigato is like so general that it can mean so many different things.
It goes on to say, thank you for his friendship, thank you for his protection, thank you for his love, thank you for his sacrifice, etc. It encompasses more of their relationship than just a romantic one. I can see that, yeah. I just think that...
Well, it encompasses more of the relationship, but not at all the romantic one. It's more...
It can.
It's more the issue that I have with it.
It can, and I think it does in Japanese. I think that in English, it would be harder to pick up on the romantic subtext of that with the words thank you than it may imply in Japanese.
Maybe. That's probably true. But even in English, the word thank you has those same connotations that you listed out below.
Yeah, that's true.
But I guess because the word I love you is so awkward, another word does take its place. I do get that it's possible. And another comment also mentioned that, because I mentioned that the translation team had to kind of fight for that one. One of the other comments on that video mentions that it wasn't really much of a fight. It was just a suggestion, and the Japanese team said, sure, go with it. That's fine. So they just said, oh, we want to change thank you to I love you. And the Japanese team said, sweet. So it wasn't like a fight or anything.
Sure.
It was pretty. So that lends credence to what this commenter is saying as a native Japanese speaker, that, well, that's kind of maybe what they meant when they had her say thank you. Yeah. And it wasn't such a big deal.
Sure.
Right. I mean, that's fair enough.
See, 12 eel deal. Excellent podcast. I'm happy I caught up during my commute, so I sincerely look forward to the final episode and your future coverage of Metal Gear Solid. 5 things. Number 1, the presence of powerful fiends and the Fireflies in Sin are probably the unsent guardians, summoners, and crusaders who died fighting with it or came in contact with Sin. After Operation Mihan, we actually never see Yuna perform Ascending. it's possible excommunicated crusaders no longer receive Yevon's blessing and instead are not granted sendings. Remember that Luzu and Gata and the character models of crusaders are shown walking in the Tower of the Dead prior to the minigame portion, or immediately after the operation, if my memory serves. This leads me to number 2. Both explanations as to what the far plane is are probably true. The biggest fallacy to the Al-Bed theory is Jiskel exiting the far plane to physically hand Yuna the sphere. Therefore, the images of people there are probably real. However, Tidus' mom, Braska, who gave his life in contact with Sin, and Chapu are also in the far plane. I believe these 3 people are memories. Oh, so he's saying there's a combination of the 2. So the Fireflies can recall who you're thinking about. And in this case, the people we're talking about, Braska, Chapu, were killed by Sin, so therefore should have gone into Sin when they died. And then Tidus' mother being a dream, right, is a recall of his memory. But they could also have real dead souls there as well, like Jiskel, who came out and delivered the memory sphere to Yuna. So he's saying both things are correct. It's not like it's a false, what do you call it? False dichotomy?
Or equivalence?
Where it's like it's either this or this.
Oh, dichotomy. You're right. Yeah.
So he's saying like both of them could be true.
That's a way at which they both could be true. Yeah.
I believe these three. Okay. What spirits do not actually get to the far plane are probably fabricated. Their images made more complete by the collective memories of those in and interacting with the far plane. Riku and Lulu are probably both correct. Those that are still alive, why living people are not manifested by Fireflies, are known in and outside of the far plane to be as such, so they cannot be dreamed, the same way we wake from our dreams when we can no longer accept them. Tidus' mom was not technically ever alive in Spira. Well, I think she was, in the sense that she was summoned, but...
Exactly, yeah.
But Tidus recalls her anyway, so the Fireflies... But I think she did die in Dreams Anarchand, right?
I believe that happened, yeah.
Yeah. So she went to the far plane. Tidus' mom was not technically ever alive in Spira, but Tidus recalls her anyway, so the Fireflies probably reconstructed her, whether through Tidus or the memories of those before the Greater War, in which a person like Tidus' mom existed. Okay, number 3, Yu Yevon is sort of egg-shaped, he says. 4, Riku's affinity scenes are pretty interesting. Apparently she wanted a large family and to settle down. And 5, I hope you two talk more about the Bavel-Zanarkand War predating the fall and rise of Zanarkand. This is the largest gap in my understanding of FF10.
Well...
I don't think there's that much info on it.
There is Machen at the bottom of Mount Gagazet. He does talk about it and says more or less the story of what happened, but it's in about 3 paragraphs, and that's about it.
Yeah, let me see if I can look that up. Machen, Bavel-Zanarkand War. Let's see what he says.
And of course he ends it with, well, some say that, and then it's like, okay, is this true or not?
Okay. The Machina War was an event that occurred 1,000 years prior to the events of FF10. It was a war that waged between the city of Bavel and the city of Zanarkand. This war ended with the creation of Sin, causing death and sorrow to rain down on Spira for 1,000 years. Story. This is as told in Final Fantasy X 2.5. I don't know what that is. Aino Daisho?
Aino Daisho?
I don't know what that is. I don't know how much I should read it.
Something of
Okay. I don't know, if you care about spoilers for Final Fantasy X-2 and later related things, maybe skip this one, but... As told in Final Fantasy X 2.5, I have no idea what that is. Prior to and at the time of the war, Bavel was under the rule of a polytheistic religious authority who for the most part had control over magic. The people with predisposition to wield magic were at an advantage to those who could not. One day, a tribe of workers called the Bedor invented appliances dubbed Machina that achieved things that were previously only possible with magic, turning the tide and displeasing the authorities who lost their leverage over the common folk. Instead of demonizing the Bedor and their machina, the government elected to find a way to take advantage of them. The Bedor became increasingly I would think the Bedor were the predecessors of the Albed, it seems like. So they sort of used machina because they were not predisposed to be magic users, and so they used machina to do some of the things that magic users could do.
Yeah.
The Bedor became increasingly audacious with their inventions, and the government became more and more tyrannical. Not only the Bavel government, but most city-states and their own Bedor workshops developing machina, giving rise to the machina cities. The Bedor didn't have the option of refusing to build further machina, or else they would be executed. So they would be executed if they refused to build more? So it's like the government stepped in and sort of like forced them to keep advancing their machina.
Okay.
The summoner at the head of Bavel declared the mage of Zanarkand, his daughter, and his followers as heretics. This is Yevon and Unaleska, right?
Unaleska.
Bavel thus attacked, sparking the war, but hadn't excommunicated the heretics, counting on their charisma to win the war and wanting to use them until the very end. Bavel hoped that, this way, Zanarkand would give up on using machina weapons against them. The worst fear of Zanarkand wasn't the machina wielded by Bavel, but the summoners, and they sent assassins to the base where they were gathered, aiming to exterminate them using bombs that resembled blitzballs. The leader of the Bedor, Alb, okay, so this is where so I was right, this is where the Albed came from. The leader of Bedor, his name was Alb, had a mechanical foot soldier project he called Fake Bedor that he wanted to substitute human infantry with. The development wasn't going as quickly as needed, and Alb in his cowardice sought to fool his own allies and used real human Bedor fighters covered in yellow suits and gas masks. They wielded long wire-like whips and were weak, lacking any battle prowess due to no prior training. The first model shown at Velm was scared and spilled blood when struck by a sword. During the battle with the assassins from Zanarkand, Velm realized no such thing as fake Bedor existed, and they were human units. Bavel's technological prowess culminated in a weapon dubbed Vagnagun. I remember that term, I think that's from 10.2, which was stored away underneath the city because it was deemed unable to distinguish friend from foe. A warrior from Zanarkand, Shuyan, infiltrated its lair and tried to operate the machina, but was stopped by his lover, the summoner Len, before both were gunned down by Bavel forces. Bavel had the upper hand over Zanarkand. Knowing this, the ruler of Zanarkand, Yevon, had his remaining summoners and the townspeople who survived the war become faith, with the exception of his daughter Unaleska and her husband Zayon, to summon a memory of his beloved city. Using the fireflies of the dead soldiers, he created Sin. Okay, so there you go. Dead soldiers, he used the fireflies from the dead to create Sin, so that lends more credence to the fact that Sin takes the fireflies from dead people that it kills, bodies. Right? Yeah. Which destroyed the real Zanarkand. As the Bavel forces reached Mount Gagazet, they witnessed the ruins that had been Zanarkand, the multitude of faith that were atop the mountain singing the hymn of the faith, and Sin looming over the horizon. By the time word reached Bavel, a ceasefire was called and the war ended. So there you go. That's what we know about the war, even beyond whatever Machen would have said in Final Fantasy X.
Yeah. Interesting.
Okay. Okay, this is from Joshua Johnson. Really great podcast. Always a joy to listen to the analysis of classics like FF10. Regarding the sending of Seymour and Ginham, I always interpreted the sending as working best on a recently deceased, but after a point it becomes less effective. Hence why summoners can't just send any fiend. Basically, there isn't much humanity left to send. So it takes a while for a fiend who is resisting going to the far plane to reach a point in which sending no longer works. Then you just gotta kill him, I guess.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That kind of does make sense to me, because there has to be some humanity there to have a will to resist death, right? But as you lose that humanity, become more animalistic, then when you kill them, they don't have the same human will of resisting death kind of thing. so they just pass over, I guess.
Interesting.
In Seymour's case, he gradually gets more and more monstrous in form. Ginham was basically a husk of resentment on autopilot, lacking much humanity. This seems to line up too with your idea of weakening the fiend enough to send them, as that is sort of what we do all game, kill fiends until their fireflies disperse. This may also help distinguish between unsent like Auron, who aren't hostile or actively resisting. Just a theory. Yeah, I think it makes sense. Let's see if we can do maybe like one. No, let's just do one more. Okay. And we got to move on because we got to do another Patreon exclusive podcast here.
Yep.
Okay, this one just stuck out to me because the first thing I saw was just a bit surprised you didn't talk about. So let's see what this is about. Picker of Nits. That's the name of this person, Picker of Nits. Just a bit surprised you didn't talk a bit more about the fight with Sin. Mentioned it before, but for my money, Sin is one of the most powerful Final Fantasy antagonists, just short of the top, actually. And they do a good job of demonstrating its raw power in story and gameplay. The party is only able to engage Sin directly by exploiting a very specific psychological weakness that might not actually work under different circumstances and magnified on a global scale, utilizing a military-grade airship outfitted with heavy artillery to level the playing field. And even then, Sin still possesses planet-shaking power and must be entered to be dismantled from within. And while plenty of JRPG villains have seemingly planet-busting ultimate attacks, Supernova or Ragnarok, for example, you are generally able to survive them, multiple times even, and the world is no worse for wear after the battle. Sin's Giga Graviton, by contrast, is rather unique in that there is simply no way to survive it. The game doesn't even bother displaying damage numbers. It's just an automatic game over. Good point there. Anyway, good job on making it through, though. I was wondering if you guys would have gone over the optional content. I would have, had I not been on the road for 2 weeks. Yeah. That's just kind of the way things shook out with my full-time job, and so I just didn't have time to do it. Otherwise, I would have. So, unfortunately, it's just the way things happen. I'm going to read one more.
Well, there was one more in relation to Sin and his gravity powers.
Yes.
I can't remember who made the comment, but the general idea that it makes perfect sense that Sin would use gravity magic because everything revolves around Sin.
Yes. Right.
As if it has a pole.
Like the spiral
gravity
going into the center.
Exactly, just like a spiral. Yeah. It's like Sin is at the center of that, you know?
Yep.
And it's sucking everything into it. So the gravity thing is perfect.
Sin has gravity in the world of Spira, so to speak. Yeah.
Yep.
It like everything centers around it or revolves around it. I'm going to read this last one from Meeks because this was about the symbol that you see from space when Sin does that thing.
Fire lines? Yeah, let's hear it.
So Meeks says the symbol the 8 lines make around the cyclone might be a reference to the Chaos Sigil, just more visual symbolism for Sin being the epicenter of everything. Sin so easily losing its left arm all of a sudden might be a visual representation of Unalesca's death as part of the whole Sin system. That said, it still makes very little sense from an actual story perspective. So I like that, though. The 8 lines around the cyclone might be a reference to the Chaos Sigil, just more visual symbolism for Sin being the epicenter of everything.
Well, I just looked up the Chaos Sigil, and it is 8 lines around a circle.
Yeah. Could be
sure. I mean,
could
that very well could be it. But 8 has a lot of meanings. It doesn't necessarily have to be that. And the number 8, just like I mentioned with the lotus flower, means transformation or mediation. It can mean those things as well as like a restoration or a rebirth. So, but yeah, I've never seen the Chaos Sigil before. That was pretty cool.
Yeah. So, great stuff. I think we're going to leave off there. There are a lot more comments, and I really wish we could get to them all. We would never have the time to do that, though. But great discussion. This clears up a few things for me. I feel like I've reached a good headcanon conclusion to a lot of my questions. That's what's important.
We're not getting to the perfect place because there is still a whole nother game here. And if there's additional stuff where it's like, we're missing this or that, it's like, well, at some point we will play 10-2.
Yeah, we will.
And we can get into it then because
And
that'll be a perfect way to kind of get in and round out a lot of the more like world points that are missing that we haven't quite analyzed here in just the first one.
There definitely will be a Final Fantasy X-2 podcast series that we'll do in the future at some point. But if people are interested in my raw reaction on a first playthrough of Final Fantasy X-2, that playlist is here on the channel. If you go to our channel playlists, there should be a Final Fantasy X-2 live streamed playthrough that I did for my very first playthrough of that game a few years back. So I think I did that for Final Fantasy Fridays for a while. So you can go watch that and get my just blind reaction to that game's wildness if you want. Otherwise, it may be a while before we cover it, but we will do it at some point. Anything else you want to say before we sign off here?
I don't. I'm excited for Metal Gear.
So Me too. It's been a long time since I played it.
Once again, a lot of psychoanalysis, a lot of Carl Jung, a lot of the stuff that we've been talking about for over a year now. I'm excited to get into it.
There's a commonality between all these classic Japanese games we loved growing up, and we just didn't know it was Carl Jung at the time.
We didn't know. Yeah, anything in the late 90s, for whatever reason, especially in Japan, it was just like Carl Jung, man.
All right, everybody. Thank you for watching. We will see you again soon with Metal Gear. Peace out.